Wow, that was epic. So Danny Montaigne just posted an interview on her Substack that we gotta talk about today. So it was a long, wide-ranging conversation with Robert Cardinal Sarah, the former prefect for the Congregation for Divine Worship, and really one of the most respected voices in the Catholic Church on the subject of sacred liturgy, and a person who I consider to be just a genius theologian, someone who I respect very much. And he's also a man who's not really given to loose talk. And so in this interview, the Cardinal does three things that we have to talk about that I'm going to walk you through so you can really understand. I'm going to unpack, as they say, some of the things that if you don't pay attention to, they kind of sort of slip past you, but these were game changers. So let's get into this.
David L. Gray Show now. Yeah. The sun is going down.
This is David O'Gray. Let's start with the Pachamama. Pachamama on the back. Because the Cardinal's words here, they just, when I really said, I was like, whoa. What just happened? So you remember the scene back in 2019, the Amazon Synod. So there was a carved wooden image of a naked pregnant woman, the so-called Pachamama, and a Dean fertility idol carried in procession into the Vatican, placed in the Roman Church, and present throughout the Synod. At the time, the defenders of the Francis pontificate spent an enormous amount of energy telling us that what we saw was actually what we saw. Don't believe your lying eyes is what they told us. They just said it's just a symbol of life. They said it's Our Lady. It's just an indigenous cultural expression. Don't trust your own eyes. That's what they told us. But here is what Cardinal Sarah says. He was there. He's a genius. One of the smartest and most respected people in the church. And I'm reading his own words. He asked, doesn't Latin America have a Madonna venerated in every country of Latin America? The Guadalupe? Why did they not bring Guadalupe to preside over the Synod on the Amazon? Instead, they brought an Incan idol. And this idol entered the Basilica of St. Peter. And then we carried it in procession from the Basilica to the Paul VI Hall. And it remained in front of us the whole time during the Synod. The Pachamama remained there. Like that through the whole Synod. And then he does something that no apologist for Francis ever did. He contrasted with the actual missionary faith of his homeland. He says that when the missionaries arrived in Africa, they told the new Christians, cast out those idols, burn them. And then this, someone from my country, a catechumen, was killed by his relatives because he wanted to abandon the idols. His family told him, no, you mustn't abandon them. But he said, I am a Christian. And they killed him. And now we bring the Pachamama into the Basilica? You just got to sit with that for a moment. Because a man died. A man was martyred by his own family for refusing to keep the idol of their tradition. And within living memory of that witness, an idol is carried into procession throughout the mother church of Christendom. Hold on to that. Now watch how the Cardinal connects it to something bigger. He ties the Pachamama to a second moment. Pope Francis in Singapore saying that all religions are like different paths, different languages, all leading to God. And Sarah asked the devastating question, then what is the point of the incarnation? What is the point of Christ's love if all religions can lead to God? Then Christ is lying when he says, no one goes to the Father except through me. I am the door. And then he lands it. That is, sheer paganism has entered the church. Robert Cardinal Sarah is not some sort of toxic trad vlogger. He's not some sort of dad with a webcam. He's not trying to get you angry so he can get up his clicks and views and generate a few bucks. He doesn't have a Patreon. He doesn't have a locals. He doesn't want anything from you. Yet here he is just speaking the truth. This is a prince of the church who is in the room telling you the thing that apologists for Francis spent years telling you not to believe. They said it was less than what we feared. But Cardinal Sarah is saying that it was exactly what we feared. And he named this root a creeping indifferentism that empties the cross of its meaning. So hold on to that, because you need this. Take this with you as we segue into this next thing here, right? Because this wound is even more fresh than the Pachamama moment, but it's all connected. So a few months ago, I did a video about this, about the final reports of the so-called Study Group 9 of the Synod on Synodality. So let me give you the facts again, and everything I'm about to say is documented, of course. So Study Group 9 of the Synod on Synodality was one of the 10 study groups that Pope Francis established in 2024, coming out of the on Synod on Synodality. So its assigned topic was in the original mandate. It was called, they were supposed to study controversial doctrinal, pastoral, and ethical issues. That was the mandate. Study controversial, doctrinal, pastoral, and ethical issues. But the group took that mandate and they quietly renamed it Emerging Issues. Not controversial. This language matters all the time. From controversial to emerging. Okay? Hold that. Because that relabeling tells you everything. When you take the settled teaching for 2,000 years and file it under emerging, you have already decided which way you're going to go in this subject. So on May 5th, they released their report. It featured anonymous testimonies from two men in same-sex civil unions. Again, presented very warmly. No doctrinal clarity or commentary. It stated, and this is a direct quote from the document, that sin, at its root, does not consist in the same-sex couple relationship. The document also attacked Courage International, which is an apostolate that's in perfectly good standing with the church, with faithful ministers who actually do minister to same-sex attracted Catholics. It rebuked them so harshly that Courage publicly denounced it as slander and defamation. Imagine that. And remember when the report came out, when I did my talk on it, I labeled the document as not safe for children. It wasn't. It's not. I think any document of the church should be safe for children to read. Any document of the church, you should be put on your coffee table and have no problem if your child wants to pick up and try to read it. This document was not safe for children. It was pornography. It was, from my knowledge, the first time that the current Catholic Church issued a pornographic document. Okay. And then it came out later that the anonymous witnesses were connected to the Jesuit James Martin, who, and one of them had actually received a blessing from Martin one day after Fiducia Supplicans. So here's the part that confirms the Cardinal's instinct. The General Secretariat of the Synod itself, when the report came out, he distanced himself from the document. Imagine that. The person in charge of all documents said, he faded into the bushes like he was Homer Simpson.
Oh, okay.
And he told the press the report cannot be attributed to the General Secretariat. And he's basically saying, I had nothing to do with this. Even though I'm in charge of everything that comes out, I'm not in charge. I had nothing to do with this. Well, it lets you know that there's some machinations going on still in the church. So one of the 7 members listed in Group 9, Sister Jose Nagula, I'm probably mispronouncing that, said she gave no input to the section on homosexuality at all. So this is Study Group 9. And the report that they issued came out without any approval from the General Secretariat and without any consensus from all the members. What are we talking about? So hear what Cardinal Sarah says about it, because he is precise. He says that this document must be examined by the Holy Father before it is sent out, because there should not be a Western group with a specifically Western tendency seeking to oppose itself on the whole church, as it happened with Fiducia Supplicans. That was a lot. If you heard what was just said by the Cardinal, he just said a lot. He basically called Western tendency gay. And he said there's some people with this tendency, this gay tendency, just releasing documents that have nothing whatsoever to do with the church. Okay? And that the Pope, you need to do your job. Now, you're the Pope. Nothing should be going out without your approval. And you don't have to sign it, but you need to know what's coming out of your church. He's telling Pope, do your job. You need to do your job. You may not know it. There wasn't a whole lot of on-the-job training, okay, for the obvious reasons. But you need to get up to speed fast, okay, because they're about to run over you. You've been Pope for a day and they're already slipping stuff past your secretary and you. And this is crazy. That's what he's saying, all right? So you need to catch that. There's a lot going on here. And he names the pattern as well. He says, do not repeat what happened with Fiducia Supplicans. Okay? And then he asks the question that pins the whole thing. He says, I do not know who makes up this study group number 9, who these experts are, what nation they are from, what culture they're from. And what he's doing here, and he's saying in just the politest possible curial language, he's speaking as a prince of the church, in a way that doesn't really do what St. Nicholas did, like just go around and punch somebody in the face, right? He said, I'm not going to go there yet. Let me just say it this way. Right. And but essentially he's saying is, in this very polite language, who authorized this? Right. And by what right does it go out to the whole church? Now, if it were me, right, there are times in my life where I find it very necessary to use language that everybody understands, that it just got real, right? Sometimes I use language that sets a tone that so that everybody can understand it just got real. Okay, so if this were me, I would have said it differently, right? I'm not a prince of the church, obviously. But I would have said, like, who put this BS out? Who put this BS out? And who told you could do it? All right. But that right there is really the fingerprints of what we've come to know as the Lavender Mafia.
It's beautiful here. Everything smells like lavender.
It's not a formal magisterial act, not a papal teaching anyone will sign. Rather, it is a document smuggled out under an institutional cover, designed to move the praxis of the church before anyone can pen a doctrinal claim or name and make them defend it. And we're going to hold on to that because that's really the trigger point I'm going to tie into this next thing with Traditionis Custodes. But this is what they do. This is the hallmark of the Lavender Mafia: create a climate where sin is no longer felt to be sin. All right, so this is the whole pontificate of Francis, normalizing sodomy. Okay. And you just kind of let the climate do the work. Okay, so this is why you see the report I issued a few weeks ago about an overwhelming majority of Jesuit churches in the United States all have just an outreach to the Ghettos. Not just the outreach, they're incorporating them into parish life without any call to repentance. Oh, you could be Ghetto over here. You can have your rainbows, your meetings, your masses, and everything's normal here. They're creating a safe space for the Ghettos. Okay. Because that's the only sin that's not a sin anymore. Right? No change in doctrine, no change in dogma, but the praxis, right? The change of the climate. Let the climate do the work that no honest argument ever could. And so notice how Sirach ends it, because this is your challenge to the new pontificate, stated in his own voice. He says, I think the Holy Father is very prudent and will not allow the dissemination of a text that he has not approved after careful study. So he's looking at Pope Leo XIV now and saying, bruh, watch your back. They're coming for you. They came for Benedict. They ran amok during the last papacy, did whatever they wanted to, and they think they can still do it. Okay, they're treating Leo XIV like he's some sort of substitute teacher coming into a classroom and they're just going to run over him. Okay, and they've been doing it. You've seen the appointments. You see what's going on. All right, nothing's. There's some machinery in the church. I don't want you to worry about at all. I don't want you to worry about. This is not something you worry about. I'm just letting you know, because your baptismal call hasn't changed. You're still called to be holy. You're still called to trust Jesus with his church. Nothing's changed. None of this really affects you. But it's things you should know about, things you need to see when believe your eyes. Okay. And watch how certain things move and how the climate wants to accept things that we know are contrary to the truth. Okay. This is the pattern. This is how it operates. So, but this is a cardinal publicly setting the bar for Pope Leo. He's speaking to him like Paul spoke to Peter. Okay. And he's saying in front of the whole church, a serious pope needs to read what goes out under his name. And you shouldn't be trusting this with anyone. Like anything that goes out of the church is really essentially, even though it may come out under the cachery, under a committee, it's under a papacy that it comes out. So everything in a way has Leo's name on it, even if it's not officially. It still has his name because he's the Pope. He's the Vicar of Christ. He's the one who is at the head of the church. So that's what he's saying. Nothing should be going out of here. Not even a paycheck. Until you see it, man. That's how leaders function. All right? And you don't need to be trusting these people who are out to destroy the church. So it's an expression of these people who work for Satan. So it's an expression of confidence that doubles down as an expectation, is what I would say. So get a handle on what leaves the building, Holy Father, because the machinery that produced Study Group 9 is still running. Which brings us to the main event. Hit the bells. This is the main event. This is what you've been waiting for. Let's get it in. All right, so I want to talk to you about Traditionis Custodes, guardians of tradition. Because Cardinal Robert Sarah says some things here that you need to hear. So Diana Montaigne asked him directly, should it be abrogated? And we'll talk about the term in a minute, abrogated. Right, because there's different things you could do to disciplinary teachings, especially where it concerns liturgy. Abrogate is just one of them. And listen carefully, because there is a whole theology folded inside his answer that most people are not going to be aware of. He says, even if there's no document that would abrogate Traditionis Custodes, it would still disappear gradually, day after day, year after year. I'm not really in favor of one pope saying one thing and another canceling it. The church is a continuity. What cancels is not a valid text because the church is a continuity. Especially if there are no problems of doctrine, of morals, why cancel it? And the conclusion. Pope Leo does not need to write a text saying it is abrogated. Let him leave it and say continue, and this text will disappear little by little. All right, so what is he describing here if you never heard of this? So a principle is a principle that canon lawyers calls Desuetude. Desuetude. And I know that there's somebody in the comment box now just ready to write, David, you're not a canon lawyer. You know, when I was explaining how that priest from the papal posse was just completely wrong. Father Gerard, is that his name? Gerald something, was just completely wrong on the whole SSPX issue. You know, you had the toxic trads and SPX people there in my comment box. David, you're not a canon lawyer. You're not a canon lawyer. Right. And I know somebody from, I don't know, probably from the toxic left. I'm this person, David, you're not a kid. Like both sides always like say, David, you don't have the right degree to speak. You're getting your doctorate in liturgy, not canon law. You don't have a JC. That canon law is really not that hard. I don't think law is that hard, honestly. But yeah, there's two forms of law, you know, ecclesiastical law, canon law, and positive civil law, right? Where you need a license to practice it. Right? Sometimes, right? Not everywhere. I think you can be a judge in a lot of countries and a lot of municipalities in America, even where you don't need to be a lawyer to be a judge. Why? Because it's not that hard. But you do need a license just to litigate, to practice, to stand before a judge. I think that makes sense, right? Just as you need some sort of medical degrees to work on somebody's brain. Okay, I'm not against licensing. I'm not at all. Okay, but that doesn't preclude someone with a functioning brain from being able to read the black letters on white paper. It's not that hard. And also, because my specialty is liturgical theology, and within the liturgical theology, we have the law. We have the lex, the law of prayer, the law of belief, and the law of living the faith, the lex orandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi. So those laws always intersect with ecclesiastical laws, the divine law, the revealed law, natural law. So all law interacts with one another, because what's good and true in the law is from the goodness of God. So don't be in my comments, David, you're not a Canon lawyer. Shut up. All right. So anyway, I digress. So, but Canon lawyers, they will call this idea that the Cardinal is describing as Desuetude. So it is the falling out of the use of law, in a way, sunsetting it is another word we might be able to use. So that the law, it loses its binding force over time. It is a law, but it loses its binding force over time. Not because it has been repealed by anyone, but because it stops being observed. It stops being enforced. And oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes, a contrary practice quietly takes its place. Now, I say not all the times. Remember, I've told you guys in that video I did about the SSPX fooling around and finding out. I was talking to you about how in Germany here, in some other places in Europe, that they still observe the law issued from the church, from the Pope, that every Catholic church has to have a rooster on top. And that's how here in Germany, you know, there's a Catholic church, and not something else, because there's a rooster on top. That was a canon law. I mean, there's a law of the church. It was a discipline, liturgical discipline anyway. At least when it came to the edifices of the church, that they should have a rooster on top. For historical reasons, that discipline never made it very far north, especially England and Scotland. And so when those people come to the United States, you know, people like Calvert and people like this, they don't bring their rooster with them. So in America, you don't see it there. You don't see it in other places in the world. But this is, so Germany and some other places are only places still practicing this discipline. So this is desuetude. So it fell out of practice. And so because it stopped being observed, at least in most of the world, it stops being enforced without even a contrary practice taking its place. Okay. So the canon law you want to read is Canon Law 26. So it speaks about this, that a custom contrary to the law, legitimately observed over time, can obtain the force of law. So you have a law in place, and then there's a contrary law, that if that contrary law is worked long enough, this one sort of fizzles out, disappears, or sort of that's desuetude. Okay, you follow? You got that? The reason is because law lives in observance of the community, not just in ink on a page. So here in Germany, the rooster on top of the church is still observed. It's still law. Other places in the world, desuetude. a contrary law has taken its place, which basically says we don't have roosters on top of the church. A law that everyone ignores, or at least in a community ignores it, whose non-enforcement the lawgiver tolerates, can die without anyone ever formally killing it. Okay? And I'll give you another example in a moment here. But for now, let's talk about Cardinal Robert Serra, because what he's proposing is not anything exotic. He's basically saying leave Traditionis Custodes on the books, let the Pope signal openness, let the bishops grant the permissions, all right, to a broader diversity of liturgy, a more openness expression to the traditional Latin Mass, in a way signal that, was it Sonorum Pontificum of Pope Benedict XVI? That's the new normal again, a very liberal openness to the practice of the traditional Latin Mass. And so let that generous practice accumulate. And he's saying that year after year, Traditionis Custodes becomes a dead letter until one day it's a text that everyone knows is technically enforced and no one obeys it, though. Right? So it doesn't get canceled. It essentially disappears. So the path grows over. I think about it in a wooded trail, right? If no one's using that path, what happens to it? Well, grass accumulates, weeds accumulates, and over some time, that well-worn path, no one can see it anymore. No one can say, oh, there used to be a path there. Because people started using this path over here. And so we forgot there was something right there. This is rather common. You understand, right? It's not this. Desuetude is not a hard concept. You don't have to be a Canon Lord to understand it. Now this, I want you to lean in a little bit here. All right. Because this is the part almost no one really explains correctly. So Desuetude is different. It is not the same as development of doctrine. I need to explain this, okay? They're not even, these two things, desuetude and development of doctrine, are not even the same animal. But I need to explain this to, push back against any comments that I think people would make. And they're still going to make them because people don't watch a whole video, even though I have like multiple timestamps. People still don't watch a video but want to comment on it, which I think is the most, first, disrespectful. And second, just low IQ behavior there is in this digital age. But anyway. But let me try, nonetheless. So desuetude and development doctrine are, there's two different questions that's hiding here. The first question is, what is changing? What is changing? Doctrine. The truth the church must hold about faith and morals. Or is what's changing is discipline. The changeable rules by which she governs practice in a given age. The second question is, how does it change? Okay. By a formal act of the magisterium, spoken out loud and on record, or quietly by non-enforcement until it fades. Okay, so what I've built for you here is basically a grid, a box with 4 quadrants. Okay, so what's changing? Doctrine or discipline? How does it change? Through the church speaking loudly and clearly on it, or by that path in the wood just fading away over time? Okay, this is the grid. 4-corner grid. So put those two questions together in your grid with 4 boxes, and here's the key. Doctrine develops loudly, formally, in continuity. Discipline can quietly fade by desuetude. So these are two different gears, and confusing them is the cause of nearly every bad argument I hear today, both from the Catholic left and from the Catholic right. So let me show you with some real documents. So if you come over to St. Dominic's Media, and I always encourage you to come over to St. Dominic's Media, we have an incredible encyclopedia there. It's called the Encyclopedia of Catholic Liturgies. And so let me show you some documents there that's in our encyclopedia. So, and I told you I was going to talk to you about the term abrogated, but let me show you some other things about how disciplines, especially in liturgy, are defined. So a law can be superseded, like we see here with Quo Primum, Pius V 1570 bull, overtaken by later liturgical law. Here we see that a document can remain in force, like Sacrosanctum Concilium, still binding today. A document can be modified, like Liturgiam Authenticum, altered by Magnum Principum in 2017. And a document can be abrogated outright, like Sonorum Pontificum, canceled by Traditionis Custodes in 2021. And so he thinks this whole thing is rather political. So he doesn't want that same thing. He doesn't want Leo to come in and just write another Sonorum Pontificum. So all four of those, superseded, enforced, modified, abrogated, are disciplines. That's the changeable realm, where a pope can bind and loose, where desuetude can work, where Cardinal Sarah's whole proposal lives. And the Cardinal tells you that's where we are, saying, especially if there are no problems of doctrine, of morals, why cancel it? No doctrine at stake. That's the reason why desuetude is even on the table. So let's talk about next why doctrine moves sharply and discipline fades slowly. The reason is because when the church develops doctrine, she does not let it fade in silence. She stands up and loudly declares it. So when she saw, for example, when with full clarity, I would say, that chattel slavery is incompatible with human dignity, she did not let the old permissions for slavery quietly lapse. Popes wrote it down. You had Gregory the 16th. You had Leo the 13th. When the church saw, again, that torture is an offense against the image of God, she didn't let her document, which endorsed torture, human torture. And the reason why this document, which the church says you can torture people as long as they don't die, and which is a weird thing to say, because who can control? Have you ever been to a torture museum? I've been to many torture museums here in Europe. I'm kind of fascinated by them, honestly. But if you ever seen these torture devices, there's no way you can control how people will respond to torture. All right. So when the church says in the document ad extirpanda that, oh, you can torture people, that was really this church's first official way of saying that you can kill people. Of her really saying that state-sanctioned homicide, death penalty, was cool. And so when the church realized after World War II that torture is insane, she didn't let that just some sort of gather dust. No. The church published a Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, which said you don't torture people. You don't torture humans. Jesus Christ was tortured. What are we doing here? What are we doing? And so the Catechism also named it. Or think about when The church, thank God by the Holy Spirit, reckoned with the horrors of the Roman ghettos when the church taught, as a matter of doctrine, faith and morals, that Jews are dogs, that you have to put them in ghettos, that they can't lead the ghettos, that they got to wear certain clothes, they can't have certain jobs. In the document, Cum Nemus Absurdum, when the church realized that what are we doing? Thank God the Holy Spirit has not abandoned us, because oh my gosh. But when the church came to this understanding, she didn't let that teaching just fade and bear silence. No, again, Second Vatican Council issued Nostra Aetate, and it was church way stating up and repudiating the whole posture of what we did to the Jews on record. And again, here is an instance where Desuetude, in a way, could have worked if it were a discipline. It wasn't a discipline. But it would have kind of worked in that way, because when the walls of the Jewish ghetto in Rome were torn down, I think it was under Pius IX, maybe a later pope, don't quote me there, but they didn't rebuild the Jewish walls. They just let them lay crumbled, and the Jews left. They were no longer treated like dogs, gradually over time. After a while, they start holding, different jobs and banks and stuff. And, but the teaching that Jews are dogs remained on the books until Vatican II. But up until that time, it was the trail that started to get covered with grass. The Jewish ghetto went away. No one kind of said much. Okay. But do you see the pattern? Doctrine develops sharply, formally, and in the open, because it's a matter of truth in the church. The Holy Spirit is the spirit of truth. The Holy Spirit guides us towards all truth over time. And so because of the church owes her children the truth spoken plainly and with clarity. So the moral turn is loud when she does that. It's loud precisely because souls hang on it. Okay. And so this is why you see popes since Vatican II, since we got rid of torture as normal, and since Splendor Veritatis, Splendor comes along and says loudly that the ends never justify the means. So these two things, torture is crazy. The ends do not justify the means, was the church saying, okay, we don't kill people. Right? Death penalty is crazy. And this was the Pope's way of just saying this loudly to us. And saying, Jesus was given a death penalty. And he spit on it. And he gave his life through it. Why would we kill people? Why would we kill the Imago Dei? And so popes keep saying this, right? Even to the point of, you heard both Francis and Leo essentially say that it's intrinsically evil, right? Definitely contrary to the gospel, which is a very strong way of saying that if something is contrary to the gospel, there's no way back from that one, right? So they're saying this very loudly, and that's how doctrine works. But discipline is changeable. It's the changeable clothing of the church's life. So, but not the living body underneath. Okay, so I can change my shirt. It doesn't change who I am. It's change how I'm presenting myself. So it's just, this is the discipline. This is my uniform. This is what I'm wearing now. Tomorrow I'll wear something else. All right. So clothing can be changed gently, quietly, without spectacle. No eternal truth depends on which discipline governs the old mass. That's exactly why disciplines like Traditionis Custodes can fade away with desuetude over years, with no canceling of documents. So we don't have to do with Traditionis Custodes. that Francis did with Sonorum Pontificum. That's Cardinal Sarah's argument. And he's saying in that way the church loses nothing essential, like our belief in our continuity. And here is the sharp point that ties the whole program together today. Everything that I'm saying, everything I'm building here, okay, with Pachamama, with Group 9. The great danger with every age, from the left and from the right, is confusing these two gears of what happens with doctrine and what happens with discipline. And I want you to picture that grid that we laid out again. What's being changed? How's it being changed? Because each side commits the opposite error. And so once you see it, you can't unsee it. I'm about to lay it out to you because you're going to see it every time once I explain it to you. So when progressives, the toxic left, when they try to move doctrine into the wrong box, they take the teachings, for example, on sexuality, on ordination, on communion for divorced and civilly married, for lay people giving homilies during the Mass. And they try to change it, a doctrine, without declaring it, which they can never defend. But they do it by praxis. This is how they operate. They do it by pastoral accompaniment. They do it by local experiments of lay people preaching homilies. They do it by blessings that quietly become something more than blessings, right? So we saw what happened recently. We know what James Martin and Jesuits have been doing blessings, and other Jesuits. We know what happened in England with Cardinal Radcliffe, the Dominican, and some other bishops blessing a sodomite couple there. So that's going to be the problem with fiducious supplicants, and why it may not hit Desuetude, because you're always going to have evil demonic people blessing what cannot be blessed. Okay, so it's going to be problematic with that discipline sunsetting. Okay, but this is how it happens, by the praxis, not changing the doctrine. That's why I always tell people about Francis, the worst pope in 2,000 years. He didn't come to change the doctrine. He was a progressive. And this is the way progressives work. They change the praxis. They do the sneaky things. They try to make what is abnormal normal by just putting it in our face and trying to say, what you see, don't even think about it. Just accept it. This is the new normal. All right. Because that's what you see again with study group 9. The reports for these supplicants. So they keep doing it until the praxis has changed what people believe. Think about the TV show Glee. Think about what they did with the whole Skittle movement. Remember, they kept putting Skittles on TV, and they were funny, they were happy, they were cheery, they knew how to dress, right? The Skittles are so funny. Let's be their friends. And then that was their way. Hollywood just making it normal. The APA changed its definition of that type of behavior. It's just normal. It's just a different way to live. It's love. They rocked us to sleep. And they said, let's just let them get married in civil union. So that's enough. It's really not enough. Let's change the definition of marriage. Let's change the definition of family. And so this is how they operate. Right? They work strategically through praxis to make things normal without anyone ever making a doctrinal claim that they have to stand up and defend in the light. So that is doctrine altered by drift. You hear me talk a lot about grievance theology. So this would be grievance theology's endgame. Changing what the church believes through the quiet mechanisms that only belong to discipline. So the progressive left, the toxic left, does with doctrine what is supposed to happen with discipline. And that's precisely the pattern Robert Cardinal Seurat just condemned when he said, do not repeat what happened with fiducia supplicans. Now, on the flip side, you have the toxic trads running a mirror image game. Remember, progressives take doctrine and treat it like it's a discipline, the slow drift. Flip the quadrant. So the toxic trad takes a legitimate discipline development, for example, what they call the new mass, what Benedict XVI called the ordinary form, what other people call the Mass of Paul VI, other people call Novus Ordo. So, liturgical discipline. So they take legitimate disciplinary development, the Mass of Paul VI, the revised calendar, the permissions granted and withdrawn, and they treat it as though it were doctrinal corruption when it wasn't doctrine, it was a discipline. And so, and they treat it as though the deposit of faith were itself assaulted every time some sort of rubric moves. And then they resist it. They dig in against it, recognize, resist. They break communion over it. As though the body of Christ were under attack when it was only ever the clothing being changed. That error, followed to its endgame, is, as we saw, the road to Neo-Lefebvrism. You know, I spent weeks on this channel dismantling. I hope you see it. Okay? How they operate in these quadrants and how they distort it. Okay. And as I said, this is the basis of every insane argument that I'm hearing from people today. They don't know the difference between doctrine and discipline. They don't know the what it is, and they don't know how it's changing. They don't know the what or the why. So, but I hope you see it. The progressive, they drag doctrine into the box where discipline is allowed to move. Quietly, gradually deniable. The trad drags discipline into the box where doctrine lives, treating a changeable rule as some sort of untouchable truth. So both errors are the same error, wearing basically opposite jerseys, and both confuse the changeable clothing with the unchangeable body. And here is what I want you to see about Robert Cardinal Seurat. You know, whatever you think about him, I mean, like I said, he's a genius. Say what you want to about this proposal, but he understands the distinction, right? Because he wants Traditionis Custodes of discipline to fade away by Desuetude, which is a proper tool for discipline. And in the same breath, he refuses to lay a finger on doctrines or morals, warning that the Pope, you need to guard the doctrine of the faith and guard against the machinations of the Lavender Mafia that you saw with Study Group 9 issuing that report without anyone's permission. Just giving it to the whole world as if though it came from your office. So he runs both gears. He's a very smart man. He runs both gears correctly. Because discipline, again, he's saying let it soften and fade. Doctrine, guard it, declare it. So that's a very smart man who knows which is which, and he understands how the church works in time. But let's get to why this matters, and again, how long this will actually take, and why I'm slightly against what the Cardinal is saying. So it matters because a Cardinal of Seurat's stature, he is publicly sketching a path where Pope Leo never has to write a single combative sentence against his predecessor, as Francis did. So there's no abrogating the text, No, Francis got it wrong. No spectacle of one pope taking the eraser to another. Just a quiet, fatherly widening of permissions without a document until the restriction withers on the vine. So kind of like what Leo had tried to do with Fiducia Supplicans a few months ago when he said that the Mass already has a blessing. We don't need extra extemporaneous blessings. The Mass already has a blessing. So he tried to do that with Fiducia Supplicans. I told you why that's probably not going to happen. But in this case, what Sarah is saying that preserves, Desuetude preserves the visible continuity that he thinks is essential. One pope should not be canceling out another pope. While, because with Desuetude, we can arrive gently in the same place and have liturgical peace. The thing is that how long? Right? So that's the part, I got to be honest with you about what canon law teaches here. So let's get concrete about that. So in canon law, the classic threshold for a contrary custom to take place and to harden into force of law is 30 years. Now, my audience, if you're watching the show, my demographic is 35 to 85. All right. So you octogenarians that's watching, it's not going to happen in your lifetime, probably. Unless you get some sort of, maybe you become a cyborg, get some of Elon Musk chips in you or something like that. You probably won't see Desuetude happen with Traditionis Custodes. I'm turning 54 this year. Maybe when I'm your age, I might could see it. Okay. God willing. If you're my younger demographic, you're 35, you see me and you call me Unc. That's fine. I'll be Unc. You're probably going to see it, God willing. So it has to. So contrary practice has to be in 30 continuous years of legitimate contrary observance, and a custom of 100 years from the time immemorial can stand against the law that tried to forbid it. 30 years. That's the ballpark the church thinks in. You can think of this too as kind of like liturgy as well. When Pius, when he issued the document bringing the Roman rite into the church, making it the ordinary form, he said what rites older than 100 years can still be in practice. This is kind of what he was saying. Those had already been in practice. I'm not going to come in and abrogate them. Okay, so this idea of desuetude and recognizing customs and customs having a force of law has been with the church for a very long time. But, I recognize that may sound kind of strange to modern ears. So let me give you a more reasonable comparison that you may have a better way of understanding. So I would say, think about common law marriage. So in common law marriage, and I think a lot of states in the United States recognize it. So, and they also have a principle here in Germany that's very similar to that a couple who never signed a marriage license, who never had a ceremony, who never filed a single form, can still become legally married in the eyes of the state simply by living as husband and wife, presenting themselves as married, holding themselves out that way consistently over time. So not civilly married, but acting as such, having all the trappings of marriage, never being legally married. That's common law marriage. No document ever created a marriage, but the practice sustained long enough and publicly enough, it ripened into a binding legal reality. So if you're in a state with a common law marriage, you've been married for a period of time defined by the state, you have all the legal benefits pertaining thereto. And the state looks at, when the state examines it, they look at how did you guys live? Did you have bills together? Did you live together? Were you presenting yourselves as spouses on children's documents, so on and so forth? There's a lot of things that can identify that. And so whatever the paperwork does or doesn't say, the sustained practice of acting as though you were married it becomes a law of the marriage. And so a spouse is entitled to things pertaining to the other's benefits, retirement, things when they die, access to the spouse's bank account, and access to them in a life-death situation, access to them in a hospital, right? Everything that the spouse is entitled to in a marriage of paperwork, they're entitled to in a common law marriage. So this is the exact logic of desuetude, but running in the opposite direction. So common law marriage is a practice hardening into law without a document. Desuetude is a practice dissolving a law out of force without a document. Same principle in both the church and the state. Law is not what's written down. It's what a community actually, consistently, and lawfully does over time. Live as married long enough, and you are married in many states. Ignore a restriction long enough with the lawgiver's tolerance, and the restriction becomes dead. The paper is not the whole story. Observance is. So could Traditionis Custodes be functionally hollow before a full 30 years? Yes, it could. If a pope actively signals openness, permissions of the traditional Latin Mass spread, and enforcement quietly stops, it could become a dead letter in a matter of years. But the point of the mechanism is that it does not happen overnight. It's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen in 5 years. And it is not supposed to. It happens in the Cardinal's own words, day after day, year after year, more so in this country than that country, okay? Until one morning, everyone realizes that the law hasn't been observed in so long that no one even remembers enforcing it. All right? And that slowness, I would say, is not a bug. Really, it's the whole of theology, because that's the difference that I want you to remember. That when the Holy Spirit develops doctrine, he moves sharply, and the church declares it loudly, because the truth cannot wait, because souls are at stake. Slavery, torture, the dignity of Jewish people, state-sanctioned homicide, death penalty. The church stood up and spoke. No, we're not going to do this anymore. But when the church lets the discipline go, she can afford to move slowly, quietly, gently, because no soul is lost in the waiting. Discipline can take the scenic route. Doctrine takes the pulpit. So Robert Cardinal Sarah is asking Pope Leo XIV to let a discipline take the scenic route. That's legitimate, Again, that's a man who understands canon law and how he's been around long enough. He's read enough to understand how the machinery has worked for the past 2,000 years. The only thing that we and Pope Leo XIV have to make sure of is that the other crowd, the Lavender Mafia, the Study Group 9 crowd, the ones who want Doctrine to take that same scenic route into oblivion, never get to borrow the mechanism that only belongs to discipline. Let Traditional Custodes fade. I guess that's one option. But never let the moral law fade. That's what's dangerous. That's what destroys souls. Again, one is clothing, the other is the body of Christ. That's the distinction. That's the whole game. And now you know how to see it. This is David O'Gray. Hey, God willing, I'll catch you in the next one. But until then, and until next time, remember that Jesus loves you and that he truly is there for you.
It's a David L. Gray
Blessings
show now.
and peace.
Yeah. The sun is going down, but faith rising up. World's deep darkness, but light of Christ rising up. Culture loud, the scripture low. We dig for the truth that the headline won't show. Unapologetic Catholic, we're still in the spine. No fear for the haters, no bend in the line. Shadow and light, we hold the frame. Show's on now when it ain't a game. Come on in, yeah, yeah. The hour come down. Oh, let the truth shake the ground. Come on in, yeah.